Let me ask you a question. What's your favorite ice cream flavor? That might sound completely random, off topic, and unrelated to the review of recently released indie RPG Quartet that I'm about to deliver to you, but I promise that if you stick around to the end of this video, that question will make sense. What's that? You don't like ice cream? Okay, fine. Then what's your favorite dessert? You don't like dessert either. Alright, fine. Then what's your favorite food? If you can even answer what your favorite food is, I promise that it'll make sense in context later. For me, my favorite ice cream flavor is coconut, my favorite dessert is gingerbread cookies, and my favorite food is hot wings. I'm a pretty simple guy. So anyway, Quartet is an indie RPG that launched its funding campaign on Kickstarter on September 1st, 2021. On these details alone, I would enter Quartet a bit skeptical, if I'm honest. There have been some recent big hit Kickstarter RPGs that I eagerly backed, like Sea of Stars and Eowyn Chronicle, which I was very stoked for, but the games themselves felt, in my opinion, lacking. Others, like Chained Echoes by contrast, were outstanding. I'm neither elitist against indies or an indie evangelizer here. I really just call balls and strikes as I see them. In this case, much of my concerns were alleviated before I could get my hands on Quartet, as established RPG channels, unlike me, got their mitts on the game early by the devs and could review before little old me had access. And every single review I saw ubiquitously sung its praises. So on August 26th, my birthday, I might add, I picked up Quartet and sunk my teeth in. Right away, I was hit by a rush of nostalgia. The pixel art style and art direction more generally are certainly echoes of yesteryear. If you're younger or otherwise not much of a retro gamer, this style might look dated or cheap to you, and I wouldn't hold that against you. For me, I'm a huge lover of the more modern takes on retro-inspired graphics, such as Octopath's gorgeous HD 2D aesthetic. But as someone who grew up on games that look more like Quartet, I felt right at home here. I've said it before, and I'll say it often on my channel, graphics are generally what I care about least for gaming. I'm not about to say that this game's visuals are a standout, they're not, but I ask for very little from a game's visuals personally. But you can easily take one look at it on Steam and make that decision for yourself. For me, the visuals were a non-issue. My attitudes towards the game's soundtrack are much more favorable. I really enjoyed it personally. Like so many things in this game, it just felt nostalgic to me, like a soundtrack that I might hear from a game from my childhood, and I was totally here for it. With 95 tracks, most of them delightful, there's a lot of music packed into this little game, and it's all the better for it. Some of the jazzy tracks were my personal favorites. On the topic of sound, I also loved the sound effect direction of this game. Gunshots and bombshells had good bassy oomph, and the broad sound of attacks and spells and abilities felt weighty and impactful to me. Well done, and serious kudos to this game's sound design team, both the music and sound effects. For the story and characters, I want to take care not to say too much, as it's really easy to over-spoil the story of a relatively short game. After a brief prologue that kind of reminded me of Lufia's prologue, where you control ancient heroes at the end of their journey in the past, you're thrown into a scenario select screen that reminded me of a cross between Saga Frontier and Wild Arms. Leaning more Wild Arms, where the choice is purely about play order and all worlds will eventually collide. Nostalgic, fun, and it kept the game feeling fresh and strongly paced the whole way through. I'd say the grand story of this game doesn't have anything you haven't seen before for the most part, but that doesn't mean the story is bad, especially since the writing, in my opinion, is surprisingly strong for a game like this that has a relatively minimalist script compared to modern contemporaries. The characterization of the game's cast turned out to be really charming, and I was able to feel attached to the characters, which is impressive because, again, this script is fairly minimal compared to what we might expect from, say, a Trails game. I've seen other reviewers say they didn't jibe with the game's humor or thought that the joke of Ben yelling to be understood better was taken too far, but honestly, for me, it worked, and I loved every second of it. Ben feels exactly like somebody I really know, and Ben, among others, had me laugh out loud many times throughout this journey. So for me, the writing just clicked, and I was here for it, and glad that the writing in this game took risks and was not dry. The game's comfortable not taking itself too seriously in connective moments of levity, whilst going extremely hard and getting dark, especially in anything involving Nikolai's story arc in the next moment. This could have been done in a way that gives the game tonal whiplash, but I think the writers handled it smartly, and I found everything to click, and I loved the characters more and more with each passing game hour. Being a game with a relatively short runtime, the pacing is brisk. Perhaps a touch too brisk, but I'll take that over padding/dragging on any day of the week, and this game has effectively zero padding, and that's a blessing. Finally, let's talk about the gameplay, and what I would probably call my favorite aspect of this game personally. This might be surprising since the turn-based action system is fairly straightforward with few gimmicks. Expedition 33's real-time interactions? Nope. Octopath's breaks or Bravely Default's brave/default mechanics? Nah, just a turn order gauge and a set of moves to use in turn-based combat. There are damage type weaknesses that most enemies have for exploitation, while others are susceptible to debuffs such as evade lowering. There's plenty of turn-based RPG system meat on these bones, but the systems are extremely sleek and intuitive. For me, simplicity is the way to go, and that's especially true for a shorter game like this. I know many people in the gaming community love complex and layered systems with deep mechanics and arcane systems, and to be fair, I can catch myself enjoying that stuff in the right mood too, but I'm broadly more ambivalent about complex game systems personally. At the very least, there is definitely something to be said for a game that does not prompt me to spend hours in the game menus, tooling my characters, and grasping at the systems, the way a Xenoblade game might, or the way Expedition 33 did earlier this year with its Pictos system. I loved those games, but Quartet is just so effortlessly easy to pick up and play. New weapon make number go up good. Isn't that just nice and chill sometimes? Do I sound oafish? I don't care. I think this game's aim for a more minimalist approach strongly works in its favor. I loved being able to grab my controller at 11 p.m. at night and just pick up and play a game like Quartet that was just so effortlessly playable. There is one combat system gimmick that Quartet has, and I loved it, and that's the fact that you have 8 main characters, and all 8 characters partake in every battle. Basically, you have 4 characters in the front, primarily taking on the fight, with 4 in the reserve charging their AP, the resource that all abilities are cast from. And on any given character's turn, they can be freely swapped with any character in reserve. You can swap as many times as you want on a turn before committing to the move you make, and I can't stress enough how much I loved this system. It did 2 things to the gameplay that I loved. First, it incentivized me to kit out every character and use every character. This was no chore. As I said earlier, itemization in Quartet is simple, so keeping the entire party fighting fit was no chore. I almost never do this in games. I usually pick my party and lock in, but here I used and built every character. And secondly, it just adds a lot of tactical depth to the combat. For instance, I said in my power ranking video that I think Yuna, the hippo, is the weakest character in the game, and I stand by that, but I would often use this system a lot with her in mind. If I had a frail character, say Cordelia, up at the plate, and the boss was to go the next turn, and I didn't think I could either severely hinder or defeat the boss in that turn, I might consider swapping Yuna in as one of the sturdiest characters in the game to take the next hit. This one system adds a surprising amount of tactical depth to the combat as you're juggling 8 characters worth of abilities, but also positioning to rest weary characters in the reserve and trying to get squishier characters out of the line of fire. I had a blast with this system. Hey, if you're liking this video, consider giving me a like and a sub. It means the world to me. The only other thing I want to say about the gameplay was that there are no random encounters. Well, I should say very few. There were some optional areas with limited random encounters, but for all intents and purposes, all encounters are on-screen enemies. And though I'm a retro gamer at heart, I will forever maintain that random encounters are best left to the dustbin of gaming history. Encounters are on screen here, though I should say they're very rarely avoidable. Usually the enemy stands in place, blocking a choke point that you need to defeat before you can move on. For my money, I had absolutely no issue with this. Dungeons never felt like they had too many fights, usually enough to keep you appropriately leveled, and defeated enemies cleared the way for the remainder of your exploration session. I thought this was excellent design personally, and the way the enemies blocked choke points, and I should say the combat presentation more broadly, were both kind of reminiscent to me of Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. It's been at least 30 years since I've played that game, but my nostalgia was certainly tickled. Further, dungeon design was great. Some light puzzles reminiscent of a Lufia game, but nothing hair-pulling. No dungeon or scenario ever overstayed its welcome, and the game is paced and flowed excellently. So I had an absolute blast with Quartet, and playing it was a sincere pleasure. I want to return to the question that I asked you at the beginning of this video, where I asked you what your favorite ice cream flavor was. Or food, if that's what it takes to connect the metaphor. For me personally, my game of the year is almost certainly going to be Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and that's to say nothing of the completely stacked lineup of games that are going to be coming out between now and the year's end. But the more I think about Quartet in juxtaposition to a game like Expedition 33 and others, the less I want to ram them head to head, and the more I want to hold them as complementary experiences that satisfied completely different expectations and needs for me as a gamer. Yes, Expedition 33 is my coconut ice cream. It hit everything I could possibly want from a game basically perfectly. But you know what? Quartet's pistachio ice cream, and that's also one of my favorite flavors, and a flavor that I forgot how much I was craving. We can have both flavors. Or maybe to stretch this metaphor a bit further, Clair Obscur is the perfectly cooked medium demi-glace filet mignon, and Quartet is a perfectly thin-crusted pepperoni pizza. Not as lavish or exquisite as the filet mignon, but sometimes you just want a cozy, quiet night in. Quartet, for me, is pizza night. The point of the metaphor is that you probably wouldn't want to only eat one food for the rest of your life, or one type of food. Appetizers, entrees, and desserts, which is to say different foods, work best in concert with each other, rather than in zero-sum opposition to one another. And that is the best way I can articulate how I feel about Quartet. In a year that has been and promises to continue to be absolutely stacked with great RPG releases, Quartet's relatively simple, linear, and shorter runtime design finds itself a well-earned spot as an accompaniment to this legendary year in gaming. It is something that can very comfortably slot between bigger undertakings and will give you a lot more than it asks from you in return. This was one fun little romp that I would recommend to any and all JRPG lovers. This is Nick BRPG. Here we talk about all things RPG, with JRPGs being my favorite. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one.